This is the Backlog Battle Podcast, episode 186.
Beyond Normal.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Backlog Battle Podcast. This is Alex.
And this is Anthony.
What's up, sir?
Not a whole lot, so welcome to the main product of our little line of shows that we do. The best part of it.
Yes, I agree.
So for those that may not know, I think we need to talk about the YouTube channel for a little bit, because we've talked about it much on the show, but it's an extension of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we are on YouTube now, and we are making videos.
Yes, we are.
And what are the videos we make, Alex?
So we've got actually 3. And let me kind of start this off by saying, like, there is a reason why we started doing videos, right? About a few months ago, one of our fans actually started posting YouTube versions of all our episodes that we've ever posted, which, you know, this guy's passionate enough to do it himself. Why would we bother, you know?
Yep.
Yeah, so I kind of felt bad because, like, I actually had to ask him to pull it down from his channel because there is a YouTube home for the Backlog Battle Podcast /show on YouTube. It's just that we were trying to bide time to figure out, like, what we're going to put there. And I'll tell you what I told him, right? And I'm not going to reveal who it is, but I basically told him that we didn't just want to put the podcast online because that's kind of half-assing it, and we don't really feel like we're the kind of people that would half-ass stuff.
Exactly.
Know? Yeah. So what we came up with was we started posting podcast episodes about
May.
And that was the start, right? We had intended to add more things to the YouTube channel so that way it's not just a dumping ground for podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided that we were going to make one show, and we kind of played around with it, and it was initially called Alex and Anthony Try Playing Video Games, which, you know, we did pray for the first one, right, Anthony?
Yeah, we did pray.
Yeah. And then about a month or 2 later, we decided, hey, you know what? We see a lot of trailers online.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we do like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 kind of situation where we comment on it?
Yeah.
And so these are the 2 shows that arrive on our YouTube channel every single week. And hopefully you enjoy every single one of them because we actually have a lot of fun making it.
Yep, we do. And we have a pretty cool release schedule. Why don't you explain the release schedule?
Yeah, so basically like Trailer Brawl, as of this recording, always comes out every Monday. The podcast always comes out every Wednesday. And TriPlay always comes out every Thursday. Now, this is all released at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Now, if we get enough feedback to actually release these, like maybe like say 8 a.m. like Eastern time, maybe that's better. Let us know because like that's the kind of stuff that we'd like feedback on. And if you want to give us feedback, it's podcast@mybacklogbattle.tv. We always read that stuff. So there you go.
And you can only find TriPlay and Trailer Brawl on YouTube. The podcast, though, you can find this on Stitcher and Apple Podcasts, and of course on YouTube if you prefer that route.
Yes, and Google Play as well. Don't forget that.
And Google Play. Yeah, Google Play. So yeah, you can find us all over the place.
Yes, absolutely. So with that said and done, I've been thinking about like shuffling the schedule around at some point, but again, like we will need your feedback for that, right? So on that note, Anthony, I actually started a survey recently on our Facebook community and on Twitter. So yeah, so the goal of this survey is actually to make sure that we're on the right track in making this podcast the best that it is. If you guys don't remember, we actually did this a long time ago when we were still the Gamer Horizon podcast. And, we want to do this survey for the Backlog Battle podcast as well. The only way that you can access this survey is if you go to our website, which is mybacklogbattle.tv. And on the very top, there's actually a link to something called survey. It's probably like on the very right. If you're on mobile, you can actually swipe that menu so that way you can see like survey, which is all the way to the right. And when you click on that, it takes about 7 to 10 minutes to answer. But every single person who actually puts in their survey results and answers and stuff, and trust me, we're the only ones that read this. It'll really help us out on the podcast.
Oh yeah, I am totally down with surveys, but don't tell me not to cuss though, because we had a survey answer like that at one point, and that's not good.
Yeah. But that being said, though, I want to kind of move on to the meat and potatoes of the show because this is a video game podcast, and I know people may or may not know about like the YouTube channel, but the YouTube channel is great. You guys should check it out anyway. But what have you been playing? Because I know that last week we had Sal on, and we weren't able to actually talk about the video games we've been playing. So, care to share?
Okay, so this is weird. This is going to be an analysis throughout the rest of the year.
Oh.
And I'm going to play this game very slowly, maybe at once a week to pace myself.
Okay.
But I think it's worth revisiting because I have discovered a wealth of videos on it lately. And I think Sal and I even talked about playing it, and even you at one point. Take a guess what the game is.
Kokoron?
No.
Oh, darn. Dream Daddy?
No, it's a long game. That's why I'm playing it in spurts.
I don't know.
Xenogears, son.
Wow, again?
I played it 2 years ago, right? I'm playing with it now, and what's astonishing about this game is I'm picking up on things that I've never really noticed. So one thing that's very fascinating is about Xenogears. We could go on length about the story, all the obvious stuff, right?
Of course.
But there's something I never really picked up on, and I've played this game since its release, and it struck me, but I never really knew how to verbalize it. And now I know how to verbalize it. This game has great cinematography.
Mm-hmm.
The way they do cutscenes in this game is actually astonishing. Xenogears is a highly debated game. Its stories talked about, its battle systems talked about. But I think one thing we can say is it's did things with the camera that's ahead of its time. So let's dissect this for a moment, okay? I think we can have fun with this, Alex.
Okay.
All Fantasy VII, when there's scenes where characters speak, right? You can't really twist the camera around, can you?
No, because all the environments are pre-rendered.
Exactly. If you notice with Final Fantasy VII, there's scenes where they have a specialized pre-rendered round to give it the effect, right?
Sure.
With Xenogears, one thing that I've noticed with this game is they took advantage of the 3D. So while you can turn the camera and all that nifty stuff with any 3D game, they did something that's crazy. They took advantage of it. So when they do these cutscenes, these in-game graphic cutscenes, they do unique things with the camera, and it's very cinematic. So when you look at it that way, it is quite astonishing, and it's ahead of its time. There's a scene early on in the game where Faye and Saiton are in the forest. This is very, very, very early on in the game. Mm-hmm. And they hear something above, and the camera pans up from as if you're looking up. It literally doesn't load or anything. The camera pans up to the trees, and you see this huge ship fly above you. Mm-hmm. In-game graphics. So that's one thing I never really picked up on when I played the game before.
That's kind of interesting that you're just noticing it now, considering that, in general, the PlayStation era is actually the era where a lot of that stuff actually happens. You brought a really good example with Final Fantasy VII being a little bit limited, right? Like, especially because they relied so much on pre-rendered camera angles. But then not to be devil's advocate here, you also have Metal Gear Solid 1, which is the pinnacle of cinematography on the PlayStation era, coming out at the same time. That game, to be quite honest, is the one that kind of showed, like, hey, you know what? Like, we can treat the 3D environment just like movies. And I think from a game design standpoint, I find Metal Gear Solid to be rather fascinating because I don't know if you remember the articles back in the day, Anthony, but Hideo Kojima actually like designed those levels using Legos.
So Metal Gear Solid, we're talking about US releases here, okay?
Sure.
Metal Gear Solid came out in November of 98. Xenogears came out in October of 98. Now, I'm not saying one was competing with the other because, you know, I don't think development houses speak to each other or anything, right? But it's interesting that those two games came out that fall. And I think on the front of RPGs, let's just separate Metal Gear Solid, because I'm not going to disagree with you what Metal Gear Solid did. And I'll be honest, Metal Gear Solid did utilize it better than Xenogears in a way because, you know, one, it's a shorter game. Two, it had graphics that were probably better than Xenogears, most would argue. And number three, it's, you know, it's a Kojima game.
Right.
But you look at RPGs. Let's take a look at the RPGs here. Not very many RPGs utilized it the way that Xenogears did. The only other game, and I did some research, the only other RPG, now we're talking strictly RPGs, that would rival Xenogears in terms of its cinematography is probably Vagrant Story.
But that was actually released a year later, or actually a few years later, though, right?
Yeah, yep, that's the only other game that would rival it on the PlayStation era, the only other RPG. So Xenogears, I thought, was for an RPG a little bit of ahead of its time in that front, right? But let's talk about what I'm noticing now. The dialogue is awkward, and I attribute that to the translation. And I discovered this new channel, and it's a pretty good channel, and this guy analyzed it. And he was talking about the character of Faye and how Faye comes across as stupid. But reading the translation myself, I'm thinking that's a misrepresentation, not on the part of the reviewer, because surely if you play the game, that does come off clearly, right? What I'm thinking is he talks about certain dialogue points, and I don't think it's necessarily what the character is actually saying. I think it's the translation issues. And over the last couple months, there has been some revealing information about the game released. And that's partially why I'm playing it. And you know this, right? Number one thing that I found out was Richard Honeywood was the only guy who did the translation job on the game. No one else helped him. And the reason for that is a lot of the other translators were uncomfortable with the religious and Gnostic symbology in the game and some of the dark material. They refused to touch that game. So now I'm looking at this translation, and what's weird about the translation is there are spots of it that are really good, and there's spots of it that are borderline, if not English. Yeah. So for the longest time, I used to defend it, but I think I defended it because I was looking at the good parts of the translation and not so much the bad parts. Yeah, it's really quite fascinating. A lot the info that came out about Xenogears this summer. Even you pointed it to me some, you know, over the summer during E3, right? You know, and then we finally figured out the mystery of the second disc, which I mean, nowhere near at this point. I still don't know how to feel about that second disc. It's very conflicting. But what's interesting is Takahashi stated that they were in a position where they would have to end the game where the first disc ends, and that would be it, and not have the entire story told. And that is absolutely fascinating because the way the first disc ends, it's essentially a cliffhanger.
Right.
So let me ask you this. If you were in that position, would you choose a game with good presentation but ends on a cliffhanger, or a game with good presentation and then during the half might go into subpar presentation, but it at least ends the story? What would you do?
I would actually answer that with an example because we've actually seen that already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Final Fantasy 13 is actually the perfect example for this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because that game actually does not definitively finish off the series. Like 13 in general, right? Like you finish that game, yes, there is a conclusion, right? But they wouldn't have felt that they needed to make a second or a third game unless they felt that there were some things that they really needed to address. You know, it's almost like the equivalent of creating a conclusion at the end of disc 1 and then just basically making a brand new game and concluding it there, or continuing it there for that matter.
Right.
That being said, I don't think that was the right choice for that particular game. And sadly, I'm not in a position to say whether or not that would be okay for Xenogears, because I haven't really gotten far enough in the game to realize what lies at the end of disc 1. That being said, though, I feel like game design in general, and I don't know if you know this, is fraught with a lot of rewrites, right? Like a lot of games, and this, people might be shocked about this, a lot of these game developers make up the story as they go along. That being said, Mass Effect, they only planned one game. Like that whole series was only one game, and then they decided, hey, this is a popular series, let's continue making this, right? You know? There are also directors in movies, right? For example, Christopher Nolan, it's one of my favorite directors. When he wrote The Dark Knight, he actually purposefully wrote himself into a corner because, again, he didn't know how to continue the series beyond what that is. In fact, like if you read a lot of articles shortly after he made The Dark Knight, like maybe a year or two later, he even mentions it similar to like cracking a code. It's like, oh, I realize how I can continue the story now beyond what I told and stuff. And that's the same in video games. So it makes me wonder if the desire to finish Xenogears and have like a disc 2 was born out of just stubbornness, or the fact that, well, we have this much time, let's, I guess, just power through to the end or something like that. Because there are many decisions that make you do certain things, right? Personally, I would have changed the outcome of the story to the point where it's still a fulfilling game at the end of disc 1, because you only get one chance to tell a story that's really good, right? And whether you want to be stubborn and just kind of tell the story using cutscenes, which they did, or you want to actually make this whole thing like a well-rounded experience. You and I talk about how divisive this game is.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like, you know, many, many years later, you having played it many, many times now, and for me, playing it maybe, you know, once, twice, or 3 times, including, by the way, the Xenogears demo that came out for the game itself. I feel like that decision is not the right decision. Because a lot of people look at it as like, oh, well, what happened in the game? You know, what happened in the game in the second part?
Well, here's the thing. And again, the second disc, I'm so totally torn because the way the narration's done, and I don't know if you've heard, but, and this is where the game gets compared to the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, right?
Sure.
Where at the end of that series, you had characters sitting in chairs and telling the story and getting self-analyzed. And that approach is done in the second disc. And there are parts where it's done okay, but then there's parts where it's just rushed. And then there's parts where it's done well. While playing it this time, even though I'm not at the second disc, I also did more research. And there are videos on YouTube where people have hacked into the coding of the second disc. And they have found whole dungeons in the coding of the second disc. And they found a whole other part that was cut out. Now talking about your planning, the fascinating thing about Xenogears, and I remember this when I first beat it, this is not necessarily a spoiler alert, but when you get to the end of the game, it says end of episode 5. And for years I was like, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? So Takahashi has this whole arc of 6 episodes about this story, this world being told through 6 episodes, right? And if you look at the Perfect Works, it tells that whole story except for the last episode. You know what I mean? So he had it planned, but the question is, and this is something that this YouTube video, I don't remember the channel, but he had a point. He said maybe the flaw with Xenogears is it was too ambitious. If you look at the story, it's well planned out. It's just that it was so ambitious that a lot of it got cut. Does that make sense? In the second dish particularly. It
does. And let me kind of reinforce the idea that you presented, right? Look at another series that he made right after that is also overly ambitious, but it landed with a thud.
Exactly, Xenosaga. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm not a fan of that series. The thing about Xenosaga was that it was essentially a remake of Xenogears. A lot of people have the strange notion that it's a prequel or a sequel. It's not related to Xenogears, but it was telling that exact story the way he initially wanted to tell it in 6 episodes. But like you said, it got cut. And I think part of it got cut was the first episode was okay, but that second episode is one of the worst RPGs on the PS2, I mean.
Right.
That second episode is garbage. It has terrible gameplay. It's unplayable. It's weird. And I know some people are like, well, the third episode is amazing. And I really don't want to play the third episode because I'm the type of guy that needs to play the second episode and I don't want to touch it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But going back to kind of like what you said, though, like I feel like the YouTube video that you were watching, I think hits a very important point, right? Like, I feel like the Japanese as a people, and now this is overly generalizing, so if you're Japanese, hopefully you don't find this offensive, but there is a sense of pride to the kind of work that you do in Japan.
Right.
Let me give you an example of this. There's a great YouTube channel for the Game Developers Conference. If you haven't checked it out and you're interested in game design, you should check it out. There is the Final Fantasy XIV behind the scenes thing done, kind of presented by Naoki Yoshida, who is the director of the series, Final Fantasy XIV series. In it, he actually describes the people who worked on Final Fantasy as blacksmiths and craftsmen, right? They're not artists, they're not programmers, they're craftsmen and blacksmiths. And what's funny is he actually used a clip of Bushido Blade to kind of illustrate this. But the point that he was trying to get was that it's the kind of mentality is permeating like Japanese culture because they work so hard to make things so perfect that from a practicality standpoint, they don't step back and say, maybe this is too much. Maybe we won't be able to do this, right? I would also like to say and describe this as the Peter Molyneux syndrome, where you have a really large scope for an idea, but in terms of execution and planning, you're the worst at it. Tetsuya Nomura is also notorious for this, right? Like that's why Yu Suzuki as well. In fact, a good example of when Tetsuya Nomura completely failed with the planning part and the ambition part was Final Fantasy 15, then called Final Fantasy Versus 13, right? Like it took somebody else in the shoes of Hajime Tabata to finish what he started.
Yeah.
And look at what he actually did with that game. Because I feel like Final Fantasy 15, and tell me what you think of this after I say this, is one of those games where they were facing that weird, hey, we need to finish this game soon. Where should we focus our resources on? Should we actually make a disc 2? Or should we actually finish the story right away? And what Tabata decided to do was cut out all the extraneous stuff, focus on very key aspects of the game that's mostly done. Like, for example, the brotherhood of Noctis and the rest of his friends, and also the main storyline, which is to take back Insomnia from the bad guy and stuff. And to be like, that's exactly the same, wouldn't you think?
It's exactly the same. And let's talk about something related to that. Takahashi learned his lesson with Xenoblade Chronicles. Because it still tells a hell of a story in my opinion, but I'm noticing it's not as ambitious as Xenogears was. Or even Xenosaga. It tells one story. And then again, you look at what he's done, we're getting a Xenoblade Chronicles 2. He's telling a separate story, but he's still using these themes of religion and hierarchy and such, but he's using them in a different way with Xenoblade. And I'm excited to see what he's going to do with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in that context.
But I will add a big but to that. He also made Xenoblade Chronicles X.
Yep, that's a big but too.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess what we're trying to get at here is I feel like Takahashi has some really good ideas, much like a lot of people out there. But in terms of execution, really, if you boil it down, it's kind of shoddy.
It is. I think if you want to look at his games, though, best execution is definitely Xenoblade Chronicles.
And that's a game that I want to go back to, right? Like it's because it feels like a complete game, like you said. Like there's nothing really compromised on it, you know?
Right. And that's why I'm pretty excited, because as I play through Xenogears, I'm going to look at it and kind of take a look at what's working, what doesn't work, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So I know since we're doing a little bit of a shortened episode, but as for you, and I want to talk about what you've been playing, but in conclusion, Xenogears has great music. It has a great beginning. It's got great cinematography, and I think the beginning's pretty well told, with the exception of the translation.
Okay.
And remember, translation, one guy working on a game that big, I can understand. And he's even stated, working on this game was a nightmare. That's what he said.
Ouch.
That's sad.
It is. It's a lot of work for one person, but like I think that era was weird because a lot of people like took on huge large scale projects and stuff, and the storage medium was just increasing, which kind of meant like the amount of text for each RPG or game is just increased exponentially.
Oh yeah, especially on the CD medium.
Exactly. So that's certainly something to think about.
Let me ask you a quick question. How do you feel about post Final Fantasy VII translations, i.e. 8, 9, etc., Vagrant Story, that type of stuff?
I feel like we can't just say like, well, after this point, things improved, right? Especially within that time, because different people work on different things. It's kind of like saying, in my example, right, if you use me as an example, that Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 was a much better game because it came out after Spider-Man 1.
Right.
It really doesn't have anything to do with it because the people who worked on it might not overlap. It might be a completely different team, right? Like, it might be within the same company, which is Activision, and might even be in the same development studio, which is Neversoft, but the kind of people working on it are different. Like, for example, I never did the testing for Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, but I worked on Spider-Man.
Right.
It's kind of like implying that the localization team for, like, say, Parasite Eve is the same as Xenogears, is the same as Final Fantasy IX. And I feel like that's just on a case-by-case basis, depending on who's actually working on it.
And it's amazing because we still sometimes get bad translation.
That's kind of like where I'm getting at, right? Like, it's not really an era kind of thing. It's more like an understanding of the people who are working on it who really want to kind of make this their best work, right? Or be able to convey the idea to the best of their abilities.
And it's also the same thing with voice acting. You know, there's a misconception, oh, they get big Hollywood listers and that type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we still get shit voice acting jobs like Trails of Cold Steel, which again is a shitty voice acting job. I'm sorry, but it is.
I think it's just, for me, from what I've experienced, I think it's just par for the course for like those kinds of games. I mean, there could be better. I understand where you're coming from. There could be better, but I think like if you look at the landscape of that game, yeah, it might slightly be lower than most of the games in that genre, but I feel like it's kind of average.
No excuse, because I looked at Trails in the Sky and it has a better voice acting job.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, then you get to like NIS games in Disgaea and you're like, oh, well, I think that the Disgaea games have a specific voice acting job or role that you have to fulfill, and maybe people like that. But again, it's boiling down to opinions at this point.
So what have you been playing?
So I've been playing quite a wild array of games, actually. Let me just kind of bring up one, because I feel like over the years, and you've known this to be true, Anthony, I started off as kind of like a Blizzard snob, right? Because, I mean, yeah, I bought like Warcraft 3, like I bought those games, and then, but overall, like, you know, World of Warcraft, I tried to get into it, and I just kind of didn't really get into it, like, not compared to like Final Fantasy 14, for example. But over the years, if you guys have listened to this show, I've tried many Blizzard games. Anthony still thinks they're overrated. I have kind of eased up on my opinion of them because they do a fantastic job of designing their games to be, most importantly, fun.
Let me clarify something. I think they've been overrated until Diablo 3.
Okay.
I like Diablo 2, but I don't care much for StarCraft or Warcraft, and I have got on record saying that I think the Age of Empire games are much better RTS. But with that said and done, I think the last few years they have proven that, like CD Projekt Red in the West, that they care about their fans, and they're pretty damn good, to be quite honest, with stuff like Overwatch. But my opinion of their older games do not change.
Okay. Well, I remember on this show, I kind of talked to you about like Hearthstone, and I kind of really pushed you into that direction. And I still kind of feel the same way. Like, let me start with that, because I'm not a card game guy. I'm not a CCG guy. You could attest to this. Never in a million years have I bought a single pack of Magic the Gathering cards. Yep. So the idea of like playing a CCG is kind of silly to me. But to me, like, I figured that if Blizzard can actually make games fun, then there is something to look at for them. Like, I actually recommended several of the GDC videos for Hearthstone and Overwatch to a friend. It's interesting how they really focus on the gameplay aspect of games, because it is video games, right? Like, the gameplay is important. In fact, Blizzard's motto on their statue, like in front of their campus, is gameplay first.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. And oftentimes, to no fault of his own, Anthony sometimes says that, for me, the most important thing is story over gameplay, right?
Well, it's true in a way.
In a way. But then you look at Blizzard's games, and they're all about the gameplay. All of them are all about gameplay. Like, we've made fun multiple times on the show before of like, yeah, what's the story of Diablo 3? Oh, Diablo's alive. You gotta kill him. Right?
Yeah, but it's a fun fucking game, though.
Exactly. What's the story of Hearthstone? Well,
you play cards?
Well, yeah, you have like this box that have cards. You sit in a tavern, you play cards. Exactly. What's the story of Overwatch? Well, it has a story, but it's not in the game. It's completely separate, right?
It's on YouTube.
Exactly. You don't need to understand the story of Overwatch to enjoy Overwatch, right? And Heroes of the Storm, which is the other game that I actually started playing again recently, you don't need to understand the story of Heroes of the Storm, because even they admit to themselves that this is kind of a little joke, right? Like, it's almost as if you're worrying about the story of Super Smash Brothers. Because Heroes of the Storm is basically Blizzard's Super Smash Brothers, but in a format that they can actually understand, which is real-time strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me commentate on something with Smash Brothers. This new version of Smash Brothers we got in 2014, there was a big old uproar that the story was cut, right? You remember that? Yeah. And if you remember the story in, what was it, Brawl, the Wii version, people were like, such a good story, but it made no sense. So when they cut out the story, everyone was crying. I was like, nope, I'm getting more Smash Brothers.
Yep.
That's not what you play Smash Brothers for, bud. Look, I like stories. I mean, I'm playing Xenogears, right? And I think despite its flaws, it has an amazing story. But there's certain games that you expect story. When I play a Witcher game, I expect story. When I play a Final Fantasy, I expect story. But when I play something like Smash Brothers or Overwatch or numerous other games, I don't expect the story.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, like, Blizzard's in that camp where I don't expect story. Now, to your point about Diablo 3, I think it has some interesting lore, because Blizzard is pretty good at lore. And to be fair to Diablo 3, too, there were attempts to add a little bit of depth to the character. more so than Diablo 2, because I played a lot of Diablo 2 and your main character says nothing. But now, like in Diablo 3, your character will actually make commentary, make comments about the situation. So
yeah, and we keep bringing up Diablo 3. That's actually another Blizzard game that I've been playing around recently as well. In fact, recently, like around June or July and stuff, they actually added a new class. It's a paid class, but the Necromancer from Diablo 2 is playable in Diablo 3.
I got no money. I should have bought it with that credit I got the other day. God damn it. Shit. But let me ask you this. Sure. I can still use a lot of the other updates, and the game's still playable without the Necromancer, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been thinking to play it.
It's actually still really fun. I mean, it's kind of interesting because one of the things, I don't want to kind of get too deep into Diablo 3 because that's not really the point of this, but Diablo 3 added seasonal gameplay. And for the longest time, I wondered why the hell would you care about seasonal gameplay? Because you're starting a character from scratch. And it's like this big circle jerk of like, hey, you know, like this is how fast you beat a Nephilim Rift or how fast you beat like a Greater Rift. But it actually teaches you some of the nuances of the gameplay of Diablo 3. Like, for example, set armor, which is pieces of armor that if you collect in a set have very huge bonuses for having 2, 3, 4 or all the pieces of it equipped, right? How to get those? What is a Kanai cube? What is a key holder? Like, who the hell is that? Why do you have to kill him? So those are kinds of goals that you can actually fulfill during a season of the game. So it's almost like a way to teach you what else is out there other than the story mode and whatnot.
Okay.
Because the one thing that Diablo 3 actually has that no other Diablo has, including the base game, is adventure mode.
Oh, yeah.
And adventure mode is this kind of just free for all, like, hey, this is Diablo 3 infinitely. But another thing to use to interpret this is something that I actually learned when watching a GDC talk on Diablo 3, which is their mission statement for adventure mode, which is endgame for everybody. And what they basically meant was, we want people to enjoy the tougher challenges of the game while providing a certain challenge for the people who want to pursue it, right? And also reward those people who try the more difficult stuff by giving them better gear.
True.
So the one thing that I'll tell you is this, unless you want to continue talking about Diablo 3.
I'll say this, though, real quick in closing. I think the one thing that has always done right is the concept of the randomized dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that concept, and we see that in a lot of our favorite games, you know?
Exactly. And, you know, and even Final Fantasy XIV took a pot shot on that too. But to kind of close this, because I feel like this is rather important, the whole notion of Diablo 3, like just the whole endgame for everybody, is so appealing that one of the things that they said in that talk too was that they wanted to make people feel overpowered. And in closing, I'm going to say this. My girlfriend and I are on Torment 8 right now for that game, and that's pretty fucking high. You know, so if you want to...
I don't know what Torment 8, but it sounds bad.
So basically there's normal mode, there's expert, there's master, and then there's Torment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these are difficulty levels. So
holy shit.
So we're at Torment 8. We're beyond normal. Like, we're totally like... Yeah.
Is Torment 8 the highest?
No, I think it's Torment 12.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, right?
I kind of want to hop on and play some Diablo, but I got Yakuza calling for me too.
Yeah, and that's kind of like where I'm at with Blizzard games too, and I feel like that's why they have this long-term appeal. That's why I feel that Diablo 3 never gets uninstalled from my PlayStation. Overwatch is never uninstalled from my PlayStation and PC. And why Overwatch and Heroes of the Storm and Hearthstone are still installed on my PC, because they are always a game where if you feel like you want to play a specific kind of gameplay, they are always there, ready and able to kind of fulfill your needs, right? Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like, and man, like I know you have a lot of games, but, and I've told you this many times before, but I beg you to try Hearthstone on your phone. Install it, because I think you'll actually like really, really like it.
I'll think about it. I don't know.
This is the same response you gave me a few years ago as well.
I don't know. I look. I'll try it eventually. It's just right now it's not my cup of tea.
Wait, are you saying that you're done with CCGs?
No. I'm just not interested in playing one computer. Because as I mentioned last episode, or was it 2 episodes ago, I am still in CCGs as there's a really new hot one out that's video game related. So
I actually did a research on that and I couldn't find anything on that Final Fantasy CCG.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
It's hot, man.
Dude, like every single person that I follow is a Final Fantasy fan. They have not mentioned it a single time.
Oh, I'll show you. I'll give you some info.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I keep pushing you to try Hearthstone is there are things that they can do in Hearthstone mechanically that you just can't do in a CCG. That actually, you would think it makes things a little bit complicated, but it's actually really easy to get into. Like copying somebody's card from your opponent's deck, for example. You can't do that in real life. You don't have a photocopier right next to you where you can shove a card and be like, all right, I just played your card. That's just one of the many examples. I can't talk about Hearthstone at length because I'm just not that good. All I can tell you is that I have played a few of the levels of the Frozen Throne expansion. I don't really know the exact name. And I also played One Night in Karazhan, which is really difficult. Like, there are boss battles in a CCG, and it's free.
What the hell?
It's interesting because it's almost like a puzzle game, because it's forcing you to think in terms of your hand and your deck building. I mean, you can't deck build in preparation for some of the battles because they want you to work with the cards that you have. So to me, those were really compelling because you're no longer playing against an AI that can cheap you. You're now playing against a specific strategy that Blizzard wants you to be able to form, and it becomes a puzzle game. And again, this is free. This is completely free. That one mission I was telling you that's part of One Night in Karazhan is free to download. It is part of the game itself. Don't need to buy anything. That being said, Heroes of the Storm is even an interesting proposition because it actually changed since the last time I talked about it on this podcast dramatically. So you and I are never into MOBAs. You tried that one game on the PS4.
I tried the big one.
Well, you tried League, but then you tried Awesome Knots too, right? On PS4?
Yeah, and someone that we know tried desperately to get me to love it.
Yeah. Tried.
And he failed because it's trash.
Well, it's different, right? And it is a very different way of thinking. And to me, that's the struggle that I found when I started playing Heroes of the Storm again. Mind you, I had not played a game since 2015, right? And it's 2017 now. Imagine my surprise when there were so many things waiting for me when I got back, just to welcome me back.
That's very good.
I got Tracer as a character, which, by the way, let me be clear here. For most MOBAs, a lot of the characters are free every week. There's a weekly rotation where certain heroes are actually free. But every week it changes, right? So
right.
I had already had a set of characters that I got thanks to a friend at Blizzard, like back in 2015, right? But because I bought Overwatch, for example, on the PC, I got Tracer in Heroes of the Storm for free. And for actually being there since the beginning, I actually had a choice between 2 different characters as well. And they gave me a choice of either or. And I even got a free character because guess what they started offering, Anthony, as of this year?
What's that?
Loot boxes.
Oh, yeah, such a controversial subject.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is that you can get characters from loot boxes in Heroes of the Storm. So you don't need to pay for characters if you have enough currency. It's the Street Fighter V kind of model of like, well, if you play the game enough, you can earn enough currency to buy a character. Or you could just wait until they come back for the weekly rotation. So I'll tell you this, though. The biggest struggle that I had going back to that game is figuring out how to play a MOBA. Because I'm an old school kind of guy, as many of you guys know out there. And figuring out like what laning is, right? What laning is all about, soaking a lane, fulfilling objectives, kind of very similar to like most other strategy games out there, right? And that was really difficult. And I'll be honest, Anthony, I had a 25% win rate like when I first started playing Heroes of the Storm. Yeah, it was rough, man. It was like banging my head against a desk. It was crazy.
Damn, 25% win rate.
Yeah, but eventually I kind of overcame that and started learning a lot about the game, and now I've figured out how to play it. Now, I think it was last week when you, me, and Sal talked about like whether or not this is easy to understand, and I can tell you it's not. It really isn't. I as much as I like Heroes of the Storm, it would be foolish of me to recommend it to you. But again, like Hearthstone, I would. Like, I wouldn't even hesitate, right? But Heroes of the Storm, it's like, I don't know. If you like MOBAs, I think you'll like the refreshing nature of it. But if you're not a fan of the genre, this ain't going to convert you to being a fan again.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try that.
Yeah. So... But that's kind of like where I'm getting at, is that I've been kind of appreciating like Blizzard games more. And, shout outs to the people at Blizzard making really good games, by the way, and really making sure that their community is getting cleaned up.
Let's be honest. These guys still make patches for Diablo 2, a game released in 2000.
Yeah. And they create like Windows 10 compatibility updates and patches so that those games work with Windows 10, which is kind of insane.
And they add new content.
Well,
to it. Yeah, I've heard they've added some new content to Diablo.
Okay. Yeah.
Crazy, huh?
I haven't heard of that, but that is crazy. That being said, though, one of the things that I really learned to appreciate with their games is just like how good they've treated their community, right? Like they've really made sure that the people that inhabit their games are protected by, their system. And you probably haven't heard about this because we haven't really talked about Overwatch in depth, but the latest patch, which by the way, I don't know if your PlayStation 4 downloaded it, it's gigantic. It's 16 gigabytes, by the way.
What?
Yeah, it's huge. It actually allows us to now report people for griefing or, like throwing a game and all that stuff to Blizzard directly.
Nice.
So we can do that now, and they have the tools to be able to control that. So, because one of the biggest problems Overwatch has had lately is people throwing games and just completely abusing the system, and there was no way to report them until recently. So, again, kudos to those guys for really taking care of their community and really making sure that kind of misbehavior goes punished and stuff.
Good. Oh, that reminds me. Speaking of new updates, Tekken had an interesting update. So I play a lot of ranked matches. So prior to this update, when you would be in the training mode and then someone would show up and they would show their internet connection and their screen name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prior to the update. Now, what it shows is it doesn't show their name at all. So you don't know who you're fighting. It shows their internet connection rate, but it also has disconnection percentage.
Interesting.
And fortunately, the highest I've seen is 2%.
Okay.
Tekken 7, for as long as I've owned it, one thing I've noticed is they have been so adamant in punishing rage quitters.
Okay.
And you're mentioning a Blizzard reminded me of that.
That's good.
Which is interesting. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, Blizzard at least is attempting to do something.
Mm-hmm.
But rage quitting is a problem that exceeds just not fighting games, but everything else. There's so many problems with rage quitters.
Oh, absolutely. And the crazy part about it, too, is like, I'll give you an example. If you actually quit a ranked game in Overwatch or Heroes of the Storm, it actually asks you if you want to reconnect to that game, the game that you left. It's just kind of crazy because I think, and people out there correct me if I'm wrong, again, send in emails at podcast@mybacklogbattle.tv. If you play Overwatch ranked, for example, and you rage quit that, right? Like you basically quit and then try to get into a new game, it's actually not going to allow you to do that until that game you left is over.
What?
Yeah. So basically, like if you rage quit this competitive game and then you left, you basically have to wait until that game is over or rejoin it to finish the match.
Damn.
So that way you can't just rage quit, find a new match and then rage quit that one again. No, that's not how their system works. The system is like, well, you're in this game, make the most out of it. Don't chicken out. You know? And I kind of like the way that that's handled, to be quite honest. I don't know if you like that at all or anything.
I agree. I don't mind it because I'm going to be honest real quick. I want to get this out, the open. I have not played Street Fighter V like I was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Which I will try in the next week because there's a new character already out, if not incoming.
There's been many new characters.
Yeah, that I've kind of missed out on. But I'll go back and play that. But Street Fighter V has done a very poor job of dealing with rage quitting.
Yeah, and they're still struggling with that these days, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and Tekken, on the other hand, you don't see it. I had one rage quit this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's I've had the game since July 1st. So now, as of this recording, September 1st. So in 2 months, I think I've had a total of 2 rage quitters. Which is good. Which is nice, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Which is nice.
I kind of wish that Splatoon 2 handled its disconnects a lot more gracefully.
Really?
So I gave the game a 3 out of 5 in case people missed that part. The fragility of its network code is starting to buckle under the pressure of the game itself. And recently, like while my girlfriend was playing and stuff, it started penalizing her by not allowing her to get into a game for about 4 minutes.
What the fuck?
Yeah, because apparently she got disconnected too much that she has to wait more. She never rage quits and stuff. She just plays the game. But that's kind of like at the point right now of like how Splatoon 2 is treating the disconnects. And I'm like, that's really bullshit because all we've been doing is really just trying to keep online. And mind you, Anthony, again, they want us to pay for this.
Yeah, I think that's shitty.
Yeah, and to be quite honest, I can't recommend the game to you because you'd be pissed off.
Oh, I would be.
I mean, especially with the kind of internet issues that we've been already having on the podcast. Like, this freaking game can't even keep, like, a steady connection.
That's already bad.
Yeah, that's already bad. And you know what's funny, too, Anthony? Like, just as a dare, you know what I did the other day?
What did you do?
I actually played Overwatch on a wireless connection exclusively.
Ooh.
Yeah. Guess what happened?
Nothing.
It was a really good experience still. Yeah. That game, which has more things going on it, was able to keep me online, and I was actually able to win some games because of how well their netcode is.
Oh, my Lord. Nintendo.
Yeah.
Hey, we don't hate Nintendo by any means. We think they have kicked ass this year, but still, there's still some problem.
Yeah, they are. But in any case, we are winding down to the end of this episode. We do apologize for this being a shorter episode. We were dealing with a lot of technical issues on Anthony's end, but I think we've come to the conclusion of that for the time being. But before we go, I do want to ask this question asked by Jesse from Facebook. Are you ready for this?
Yes, sir.
All right. So he says, how about this? Your house is on fire. You can grab 2 gaming items on your way out, but everything else will get turned to ash. What do you take?
Well, one, I would grab my 3DS because it has a shitload of stuff. Is that a cheat?
No, I think that's legit.
And I would probably grab my PS4 because it has a lot of shit on it as well. The end.
Wow.
And if I had a third one, it would be the Vita.
Now the thing is, like he said, like gaming items, right? Like that's to me is a problem because technically a TV is not a gaming item. So if we grab a PS4, it's like, what are you going to plug it on?
Well, there's plenty of HD TVs around, so there.
I mean, I guess, but like, that's still. Then you get into a question of like, well, there's the insurance and all that stuff. What if you set the fire yourself? And that's kind of like.
Okay, you're overthinking it. Just say you're just overthinking the questions. What 2 gaming items would you grab? Quit thinking about insurance and why the fire was caused. All we know is your house is on fire and you can only grab 2 items. Stop overthinking it. Just answer it.
Okay, so this is actually really easy for me.
Okay.
My Switch and my PS4 Pro.
Nice.
Yeah, because like, hey, I don't have a TV, but I have the Switch.
Okay.
It's built into it, so it's like it's got its own screen. Yeah, sorry, Vita, you're gonna be crumbling to dust. So
I would say my Vita if I could take 3.
yeah, well, yeah. I unfortunately, like, the 3DS and the Vita are not even within my top 2 things to get. I would just literally like grab like the machines themselves, and if I can grab like the AC adapter for like my Switch, I'd probably do that. So,
and for any new listeners, Anthony, why aren't you grabbing a Switch? Well, I have no grab, so there you go.
you have no Switch to grab, right?
Yeah, I have no Switch. I don't own the Switch, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, guys. Well, before we go, and, thank you very much for that email, by the way, Jesse. You can email us at podcast@myBacklogBattle.tv if you've got any questions, comments, or suggestions. And if you're curious of where you can or may be able to buy a Nintendo Switch or any video game and stuff, please consider using our Amazon link at bit.ly/Amazon Backlog Battle. You guys over on YouTube and, of course, listening to this podcast are probably noticing that we completely took out like the whole Amazon intro from the beginning of the show. Well, we don't want to make things rather ambiguous. They're not paying us or anything like that in terms of like putting them on the show. We just decided to like just, put them in the front so people, got the link out of the way. But if you do decide to shop on Amazon, please consider using our link. It is bit.ly/Amazon Backlog Battle. And remember, you can actually get 20% off on all pre-orders for video games if you use our link and become an Amazon Prime member. So is there anything else that you want to say, Anthony, before we go?
Adios.
All right. We'll see you guys later. Happy gaming.